Who is this man? Eating at my table. Catherine Langford's tone was pure venom. Her silk robe fluttered as she swept into the grand dining hall, her heels striking the marble floor like gunshots. Diamond earrings flashed in the chandelier light as she stopped cold, her perfectly manicured hand flying to her chest in performative shock. Before her, at the end of a crystal-laden table that could seat 30, sat a dark-skinned man. His shirt was still creased from prison, smelling of the streets and a desperation that had no place in her home. A heavy, ornate silver spoon was paused halfway to his lips, a single drop of soup trembling at its edge. The entire house staff froze. Every maid, every gardener, the butler, all caught between breath and fear. Blessing, the housemaid known for her quiet obedience and endless patience, stood beside the stranger, a silver tray clutched in her trembling fingers. Blessing's eyes filled instantly. "Ma'am, please. He's my husband." Catherine's laughter was brittle glass, sharp and cold. "Your husband?" She repeated the word as if it were a piece of trash she'd found on her tongue. "You brought this thing into my home? Into this dining room? Without my permission?" "Ma'am, he just came back today," Blessing whispered, the tears now welling and threatening to spill. He hasn't eaten since morning. I thought." "You thought wrong." Catherine's voice sharpened to a razor's edge. Her face, a mask of cold fury, turned toward the hallway. "Security!" 2 guards burst in from the foyer. The youngest, Mark, looked barely 20, and his eyes darted nervously between Catherine and the man at the table. The other Big Al was built like a doorframe and waited, stone-faced, for her order. "Take him down," Catherine snapped. "Ma'am, please," Blessing cried, stepping between the guards and her husband. But Catherine shoved her aside with a violent force that sent the silver tray clattering. Hot soup, golden and rich, splashed across the pristine white marble floor, a stain of cruelty in the immaculate room. Samuel, because that was his name, rose slowly from the chair. He held his palms open, his eyes steady but pleading. "I'm not here to cause trouble," he said, his voice deep and ragged from 5 years spent behind concrete walls. "I only came to see my wife. Your wife is my maid." Catherine's words were sharp, meant to draw blood. "That makes you my problem." Her face twisted into a mask of pure disgust. "On your knees." Big Al hesitated, his gaze flickering. "He's not resisting, ma'am." Catherine's voice rose, trembling with fury and a strange, dark satisfaction. "I said, kneel him." Hands like iron vices gripped Samuel's shoulders, forcing him down. His knees hit the cold marble with a dull, sickening thud. He didn't fight. He didn't curse. He just stared at the floor, his jaw clenched, the shame burning hotter than any anger he felt. Blessing fell beside him, her body shaking with sobs, tears streaming down her cheeks. "Stop, please, Catherine. He's done nothing wrong. How dare you?" Catherine circled them like a predator. "How dare you bring a convict into this mansion? Into my presence? You thought I wouldn't find out?" Samuel looked up slowly, his voice quiet but clear. "I paid for what I did." 5 years? Catherine's expression curdled. 5 years, she sneered, isn't enough to wash the dirt off you. He flinched, not at her insult, but at the raw shame he saw reflected in Blessing's eyes. His wife, the woman he loved, was being forced to watch this. She reached for his hand, her fingers trembling. Catherine saw the small gesture of comfort and lunged. Her palm cracked across Blessing's face. The sound echoed like a gunshot in the cavernous room. Everyone froze. Even the guards took an involuntary step back. Blessing crumpled slightly, her hand flying to her bright red cheek, her eyes wide with disbelief. Catherine straightened, her chest heaving, drunk on her own power. "Call the police," she ordered, her voice cold and final. "Right now. I want him arrested for trespassing." From outside, the faint wail of sirens began to rise, growing louder, closer. Blessing clutched Samuel's arm, her voice a broken whisper. "Don't move, love, please. Someone will listen to us. They have to." Catherine turned away, smoothing the silk of her robe as if she were merely brushing off dust. "Not in my house," she murmured, a cruel smile playing on her lips. "Not ever." The front doors loomed beyond the foyer, red and blue lights beginning to bleed through the stained glass, painting the marble in blood and ice. The wail of the approaching sirens mixed with Blessing's desperate sobs. 2 police officers stepped inside, their boots echoing against the marble. Catherine's voice was sharp and commanding. "Officer, arrest that man. He trespassed on private property." Samuel's wrists trembled as one officer reached for the cuffs. Blessing clung to his arm, crying, "Please, he's my husband." "He's not dangerous. He's only just come home." "Home?" Catherine snapped. "This is my home, and criminals don't belong in it." Mark, the younger guard, looked away, shame coloring his face. The butler hovered in the doorway, whispering prayers under his breath, too terrified to interfere. Samuel's voice, deep and weathered, broke the tension. "I came here because my wife works here. I just wanted to see her face, to thank her for keeping our children alive while I was gone." The older officer hesitated, looking at Catherine. "Ma'am, if he's her husband, maybe we can just—" "I said arrest him," Catherine roared. She turned on Blessing, her words pure venom. "And you're finished. Pack your things tonight. You and your ex-convict husband will never step foot in this mansion again." Blessing covered her mouth to stifle a sob. "Please, Mrs. Langford, don't do this." "I've worked here for years." "Then you should have learned your place," Catherine hissed. The room pulsed with humiliation and fear. Samuel turned slowly toward the guards. "You don't have to touch me. I'll go." He started to rise, but Catherine's words froze him mid-motion. "On your knees," she said coldly, "until the police decide what to do with you." For a moment, time stopped. Even the officers looked uneasy. Then came the sudden rumble of a car engine outside. The deep, confident purr of a Bentley Mulsanne rolling up the driveway. The air in the room changed. Every servant straightened. Even Catherine's lips parted in surprise. The main doors swung open. A tall man in a charcoal gray suit stepped in, briefcase in hand, his silver tie gleaming under the chandelier. His expression was composed, but his voice thundered through the hall, cutting through the sirens and the sobs. "What's going on here?" Every head turned. The police, the guards, even Catherine froze. It was Richard Langford, billionaire CEO of Langford Industries. Catherine's husband? And the master of the house, Richard. Catherine gasped, forcing a nervous, brittle smile. "Thank God you're here." She rushed toward him, her hand fluttering to his arm. This man," he broke in. "He was at our table, eating our food. I had to call the police." Richard Langford didn't look at his wife. His gaze swept the room, taking in the scene with a cold, analytical precision. He saw the 2 police officers, their hands hovering near their cuffs. He saw his own security guards, Big Al looking stoic and Mark looking sick. He saw the spilled soup, a golden smear on the white marble. He saw Blessing, his most reliable maid, crumpled on the floor, a bright red handprint stark against her dark skin. And then his eyes locked on the man still kneeling, a man who refused to look defeated even in the depths of humiliation. Samuel lifted his head, his eyes meeting Richard's. In that instant, something flickered between them. Recognition, disbelief, perhaps even fate. Richard's brow furrowed. The world around him seemed to dim as he took a slow step forward, ignoring his wife's frantic whispers. Confusion, then a dawning awareness etched itself on his face. "Sir, please," Blessing whispered, her voice trembling. "He didn't break in. He's my husband. I work here. He just came home from prison." Catherine cut in, her voice sharp. "Don't let her fool you, Richard. This man is a criminal. I was protecting us." Richard's eyes narrowed, but not at Samuel. He glanced at Blessing's bruised cheek. "By slapping an employee?" Catherine's mouth opened, but for the first time, no sound came out. Richard walked past her, stopping directly in front of the kneeling man. He studied his face, the worn features, the quiet dignity, the dark eyes that held a storm of pain. Before he could utter another word, a pause. A pause. Before I tell you what happens next. If you believe in karmic justice, if you believe that a good man deserves a second chance, and if you believe that true love can survive even the cruelest shame, then hit that like button. Subscribe if you're new here, and drop a comment telling us where you're watching from. You must stay until the end because what happens next will leave you speechless. 5 years. That's how long Samuel had been gone. When the prison gates finally groaned open, the world beyond them looked like a different planet. The sun stabbed at his eyes, and even the wind felt unfamiliar, too clean, too free. He clutched a single plastic bag containing everything he owned, one faded Bible, a worn-out photograph of Blessing and their 3 children, and a pair of shoes that didn't fit anymore. He stood on the sidewalk, watching cars zip by on the busy Atlanta street. People hurried past him, lost in their phones, lost in their worlds. No one knew who he was. No one cared that he had once run a small, successful garage, or that a jealous boss had framed him for theft just to destroy his name. All they saw, if they bothered to look at all, was an ex-convict. He took a deep breath, feeling the weight of invisible chains still clinging to his skin. "I'm free," he whispered, as if saying it aloud would make it true. A passing bus roared by, dust curling around his feet. By the time he reached their old neighborhood in South Fulton, the streets had changed. The small grocery store where Blessing used to buy rice was now a pharmacy. The church where they were married had a new pastor. The apartment building where they once lived was freshly painted, the laughter of other children, not his, spilling out of the windows. He knocked on the door of their old unit, his heart pounding a frantic rhythm against his ribs. A young couple, barely older than his eldest son would be, answered. "I'm sorry," the man said kindly. "We just moved in last year. The woman who lived here before, she left, said she got work in Buckhead, cleaning houses for some rich family." Samuel's voice cracked. Did she leave a forwarding address?" The woman shook her head, her eyes soft with pity. "No, but she came by once to pick up some mail. She looked tired, but so proud, said she was doing it all for her kids." Samuel smiled faintly. That sounded like Blessing. She'd always carried herself with a quiet dignity, even when life was breaking her down. That night Samuel slept on a park bench near their old church, staring up at the blinking city lights. He clutched the precious family photo to his chest, the edges soft and worn from years of desperate touch. "I'm coming home, Blessing," he whispered to the night sky. "I swear it." Morning came, cold and gray. He found a cheap, clean shirt at a thrift shop for $2. He shaved his scruff in a gas station sink, the cold water a shock to his skin. He spent his last few dollars on a city bus ticket to Buckhead. As the skyline rose, all glass towers and reflected sunlight, he pressed his hand to the window. "One more chance, Lord," he murmured. "Just one." When the bus stopped near Oak Ridge Hill, he stepped off and stood before the iron gates of a mansion he'd only ever seen on television. The Langford estate. Somewhere beyond those gates, his wife was cleaning rooms, mopping marble floors, surviving for him. For their family. He squared his shoulders, took a deep breath, and began walking up the long, winding driveway toward love, toward redemption, and toward the storm that was waiting for him inside. The Langford mansion towered above Samuel like a cathedral of glass and cold stone. He hesitated at the massive iron gate, rehearsing words he hadn't said in 5 years. "I'm sorry. I'm home. I never stopped loving you." When he pressed the bell, the faint chime echoed down the long driveway. Moments later, he heard footsteps from inside, soft, hurried, and achingly familiar. The heavy door cracked open. Blessing stood there, her gray uniform damp with cleaning spray, a polishing towel in one hand. For a moment she couldn't breathe. Her lips parted, her eyes wide as if she were seeing a ghost. "Samuel." He smiled weakly, his heart feeling too big for his chest. "It's me, Bless, I'm home." The towel slipped from her fingers. She staggered back, one hand flying to her chest. "Oh my God, Samuel. Is it really you?" He nodded, his voice trembling. 5 years. I counted every single day. She launched herself forward, her arms wrapping around him in a desperate, clinging embrace, sobbing into the thin fabric of his shirt. The scent of lemon polish and home, her scent, filled his lungs. For the first time in half a decade, the world made sense again. "I thought you were gone forever," she whispered, her tears soaking his shoulder. "They tried to break me," he said softly, holding her tight. "But every night I closed my eyes and I saw you. I saw our kids. That's what kept me breathing." Her tears turned to laughter, shaky and bright. "Our babies. They miss you so much. Michael's taller than me now. Anna, she started singing in the church choir. And David, he still asks when you're coming home." Samuel cupped her face, wiping her tears with his thumb. "Then I came just in time." She suddenly looked back toward the grand staircase beyond him, her voice dropping to a panicked whisper. "We can't stand here, Mrs. Langford." "She hates surprises. If she finds you," he interrupted with a weary smile. "I just need a meal, Bless, just a minute to see your face. I won't stay long, I promise." Reluctantly, she ushered him inside, closing the heavy door behind them. The marble floors gleamed, reflecting their images like two souls hopelessly out of place. "Sit," she whispered, leading him not to the grand dining hall but to the small breakfast table near the window. "I'll bring you some food. The chicken soup from last night is still good." He watched her hurry to the kitchen, still graceful even after years of exhaustion. The hum of a massive refrigerator and the faint ticking of a golden clock were the only sounds. When she returned, she placed a steaming bowl of soup before him. It was simple, humble, but it smelled like mercy. "I miss this," he murmured, his eyes closing as he took the first spoonful. Blessing brushed a stray lock of hair from his cheek. "She's upstairs. On her phone, probably yelling at someone again. She thinks owning all this, owning us, makes her happy." "You deserve better than this life, Blessing," he said, his voice thick with a sudden fierce anger. She smiled sadly. Better doesn't feed the children. They shared a silence that said everything words couldn't. Then click, clack, click. The unmistakable, terrifying rhythm of high heels on marble, fast and sharp. Blessing's face drained of all color. "Who's that?" Samuel asked quietly. Her whisper barely left her lips. "Catherine Langford." The footsteps grew louder, sharper, slicing through the air. Samuel straightened his back. Blessing froze, her hand gripping the edge of the table. The last sound before the door swung open was Catherine's voice, low and venomous. "Who is this?" The moment replayed, this time with the full weight of its horror. The accusations, the venom, the shove that sent soup scattering across the floor, the guards, the cruel command to kneel, the slap that echoed in Samuel's soul, the sirens, and finally the deep purr of the Bentley, the opening of the door, and the one voice that could change everything. "What's going on here?" Richard Langford stood in the doorway, his eyes locking with Samuel's. And now the scene snapped back to the present. Richard walking past his stunned wife. The police officers frozen. Richard stopped, standing directly over the kneeling man. "Stand up," he said softly. The guards hesitated, looking at Catherine. Richard's tone deepened, final and cold. "I said stand him up." They pulled Samuel gently to his feet. He stood straight, shoulders squared, face unreadable, meeting the billionaire's gaze. For a long, silent moment, the two men just looked at each other. Then recognition struck Richard like lightning. "Samuel." Richard's voice softened, filled with disbelief. "Samuel? Iheka?" Samuel blinked, the world tilting. You remember me?" "Atlanta Tech," Richard said slowly. "Business school. You were top of the class. You won the Drayton Scholarship." Catherine frowned, her perfectly plucked eyebrows knitting in confusion. "Richard? You know him?" Richard turned. His expression, once confused, was now hardening into a storm of dark rage. More than you do, apparently. The room shifted. The power dynamic shattered. The police officer stepped back, suddenly aware this was not a simple trespassing call. "Darling, you can't be serious." Catherine forced a nervous laugh. "This man, he's an ex-convict. He was trespassing." Richard cut her off, his voice booming now, echoing off the high ceilings. "In this house, Catherine, no man kneels unless he is praying." The silence that followed was deafening. He turned to the officers. "Thank you, gentlemen. Your services are no longer required. I will handle this." The police, eager to escape the volatile situation, nodded and quietly let themselves out. The front door clicked shut, sealing the four of them in the hall. Richard's gaze was cold as steel as it landed on his wife. "Go to our room, Catherine." "But Richard, now." She stared at him, her mouth opening and closing, but she saw a look in his eyes she had never seen before. She turned, her robe snapping, and stormed up the staircase. Richard turned back to Samuel, his eyes warm with something between regret and wonder. "My friend," he said, his voice thick, "tell me what happened to you." Samuel opened his mouth to speak, but emotion, held back for 5 long years, finally broke through his composure. His throat tightened. For the first time since he'd walked out of those prison gates, someone had called him friend. Richard's gaze was kind, but his jaw was tight with a cold anger. "Please," he said, gesturing to the chairs at the very table Samuel had been forbidden to eat at. He walked to the sideboard, ignoring the spilled soup, and poured 2 glasses of water with a steady hand. He handed one to Samuel and one to Blessing. "Tell me what happened to you." Samuel's hands shook slightly as he took the glass. He told him everything. He spoke of the small auto shop he had built from scratch on Auburn Avenue. He spoke of his dream to expand, of the 2 boys he'd hired from the neighborhood. And then he spoke of the manager, a man he'd trusted who had framed him for a missing shipment of parts. "He planted them in my garage," Samuel said, his voice low, the memory still raw. "I told the police the truth. I showed them my books, but—" His voice trailed off. "You can imagine how they looked at me. A black man from the South Side accusing his white manager. The case was over before it began." 5 years, Blessing whispered, her hand finding his. 5 years, Samuel confirmed, of metal bars, cold food, and nights spent wondering if my children would still recognize my face. I read books. I tutored other inmates in math just to remind myself I still had a mind. Richard's hand clenched around his own glass until his knuckles turned white. He looked at Blessing's bruised cheek, then at Samuel's worn-out shirt. "Men like you," he said, his voice thick, "should be sitting at boardroom tables, not in prison cells." He stood up, a sudden, unshakable decision on his face. "You start tomorrow, 9 a.m., Langford Industries. My company could use a mind that's been tested by fire." Samuel's mouth parted, stunned. "Sir Richard, you trust me? After everything?" Richard nodded, his eyes unwavering. "You've already been judged, Samuel. Now it's time for you to be seen." Blessing covered her face, weeping quietly, not from sadness, but from the sudden, terrifying, beautiful shock of hope. Weeks passed. The rhythm of the Langford mansion changed. Samuel, dressed in a sharp suit Richard had provided, became a constant presence in the billionaire's study. He wasn't just an employee, he was an advisor. He found inefficiencies in the supply chain that saved the company millions. He saw opportunities in emerging markets that no one else had. Richard, invigorated, felt like he was back in business school, sparring with the brightest mind in the room. But Catherine watched it all. Every compliment Richard gave Samuel felt like a blade twisting in her chest. Every handshake, every shared laugh, every evening meeting in the library burned like acid. She saw the man she had forced to his knees now standing as her husband's equal. One evening, Blessing was polishing silver in the hallway when she heard Catherine's voice from the master bedroom, low and furious. "I don't care what it takes. He's getting too close. I want you to find something on him. If you can't find it, create it. I'll frame him for something Richard can't ignore. Theft. From the company. I want him back in a cell where he belongs. Blessing's blood ran cold. She fled to the study where Samuel was working late. "They're going to frame you again," she cried, recounting every word. Samuel's face grew grim. He looked at the woman he loved, trembling with fear, and a cold resolve settled over him. "She won't stop," he said quietly. "She won't stop until she destroys everything she fears." He stood up and straightened his tie. Maybe it's time Richard knows who he's really married to. He walked to Richard's private office. The billionaire was reviewing reports. "Samuel, what is it?" "Richard," Samuel said, his voice steady. "There's something I should have told you from the beginning. Before my arrest, I worked part-time as a driver to make ends meet. My most regular client was Catherine." Richard frowned. "My wife?" Samuel nodded. "Every Thursday afternoon. Same destination, an apartment downtown. I thought it was business. Until one day she forgot her phone in my car." He paused. "I saw messages, Richard. From another man. Her ex-boyfriend." Richard's face drained of color. "An affair?" "Worse," Samuel said softly. "I didn't want to interfere. But the messages, they weren't just about cheating. They were about you. About draining your accounts, about a plan to defraud you." Samuel reached into his briefcase and placed a small, worn flash drive on the polished desk. "I was framed for theft before I could decide what to do. I kept this hidden for 5 years. It has everything. Recordings of her calls, copies of messages, a step-by-step plan to forge your signature and liquidate your assets." Richard sat alone in his office long after Samuel left. The only light came from the blue glow of his computer as he inserted the drive. He heard his wife's voice, her laughter, cold and cruel. "He's too blind to notice. He trusts me completely. Once I have his money, Ethan will disappear. He'll be left with nothing." The next morning, Catherine breezed into the dining room, humming. Richard sat at the head of the table. The same table. "Morning, darling," she said sweetly. He looked up, his eyes dark and hollow. He slid the flash drive across the table. "Listen to it." Her face twitched. "Richard, what is this? Some new game from your pet project?" "It's your voice, Catherine," he said, his own voice breaking. "Every word. Every lie. You nearly destroyed an innocent man to cover your tracks, while you were planning to destroy me." Her mask cracked. You believe him? A criminal over me?" Richard rose slowly, his voice thundering. "He is more of a man on his knees than you will ever be standing. You used me. You used my name. You used my trust." He pointed to the door where Big Al and Mark were now standing. "The only thing I regret," he said, "is not seeing you sooner." On the table lay a crisp stack of papers. Divorce, asset freeze. "Security removal. You can't do this!" she shrieked. "It's already done," he said. "You will leave this house with nothing but the clothes on your back. The same mercy you showed Samuel." Her scream tore through the mansion as the guards took her arms and escorted her out. Months later, sunlight poured through the same windows. The mansion was alive, not with tension but with laughter. At the head of the boardroom table sat Samuel Ihika, the new chief operating officer of Langford Industries. Blessing stood beside him, no longer in a maid's uniform, their children playing freely on the lawn. Richard Langford raised a glass. "To second chances," he said, his eyes on Samuel. "And to the man who reminded me that wealth means nothing if it doesn't lift another soul. If you believe good people still deserve to win, if you believe justice can rise even where cruelty once stood, then do one simple thing. Like this video and share it with someone who still believes."